Has someone ever taken credit for your work in the family?
You ever have that moment where your brain short circuits, not because someone screamed at you or hit you or did something dramatic, but because they looked you right in the eye while doing something awful and they smiled? That strange, icy moment where your gut tightens and your body doesn't know whether to laugh, scream, or run. That's what happened when my sister picked up my custom titanium iPhone from the kitchen island, rolled it around in her hand like it was a damn toy, and then, without a flinch, raised it shoulder high and slammed it flat onto the granite counter, screen first, like she was flipping a pancake. There was a sound, crisp and final, the screen cracking like a dry bone, and a few stunned heartbeats of silence after that. And then she looked at me, not with panic, not with guilt, but with that smug, syrupy little smile she's worn since we were kids, and said the 5 words that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. Oops. You're rich enough anyway. Now, let me be very clear, this wasn't just a phone. This wasn't some off-the-shelf device I picked up at the Apple Store on a board Tuesday afternoon. It was custom commissioned in Tokyo, built by a boutique security firm I consult with. Titanium casing, encrypted internal layers, a self-wipe kill switch, biometric lockout, and yes, sentimental value, because I designed it to honor my first real company milestone. For months of logistics, paperwork, and approvals, and there it was face down, shattered, with my sister hovering over it like she'd just stubbed her toe instead of destroying my property. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I just stood there, hands still wet from the sink. I'd been rinsing vegetables for dinner, feeling the silence press into my ears like cotton. My mom was in the living room pretending not to hear, probably praying we wouldn't make a scene in front of the boyfriend. My dad was upstairs watching the news, oblivious. Tessa's boyfriend, Kyle, or maybe it was Cody this time, I honestly stopped trying to remember, was fiddling with the wine opener, clearly tuned out. So it was just me, her, the cracked phone, and that smug little snort. She said, "Don't act like it's the end of the world. God, you always act like everything is so precious. You can just buy a new one." I said nothing. I picked up the phone carefully with both hands, glass fragments glinting in the overhead light, and turned it over like I was holding a dead bird. The screen was beyond repair. It hadn't just cracked, it had spiderwebbed across the entire face. That was no drop. That was deliberate. She tilted her head and grinned wider, probably waiting for me to explode. I didn't. Instead, I walked to the hallway, grabbed a dish towel, wrapped the phone gently like it was a relic, and placed it in my purse. Then I calmly pulled out my backup phone, the one I keep for travel emergencies, and opened my camera roll. Because what Tessa didn't realize was that 10 minutes before she'd pulled her little stunt, I'd caught her on video. She'd been in the kitchen alone, picking up my phone, flipping it, aiming it like she was throwing it, doing mock tosses, smiling at herself. She didn't know I had security footage. The kitchen has a motion-activated camera. And I'd saved the clip, just in case. I didn't expect to use it. I wasn't waiting for her to screw up. But when she did, I was ready. So I calmly sent that video, along with a time-stamped screenshot of my phone's home screen, proving it was functional until 10 minutes before the accident, to one single recipient, my dad. I didn't say a word. I didn't blast her in front of the family. I didn't confront her or demand an apology. I just sent the receipts and waited. Because here's the thing about my dad, he might play dumb when the family is around, and he might ignore drama until it spills into the living room, but he's a man who believes in facts. And I'd just given him 2 pieces of evidence that spoke louder than any family dinner excuse ever could. That night, while we all sat around the table pretending nothing had happened, Mom offering overcooked chicken like it was currency, Tessa sipping wine like she hadn't just obliterated something irreplaceable, I saw my dad glance at his phone. I watched his eyebrows lift, just slightly, and then his lips flatten into that tight line he gets when he's about to lose his temper but knows better than to do it in front of guests. Tessa, across the table, caught the shift and asked, all sugary sweet, "Something wrong, Dad?" He didn't answer. He just looked at her. Not me, her. And that's when I knew he'd watched the video. That's when her smile faltered, just for a second. She blinked, tilted her head again, this time confused. And I just smiled down at my plate, took a slow sip of my wine, and asked, "Did you get the video I sent, Dad?" Just loud enough for her to hear. Not enough to cause a scene. Just enough to light the fuse. The moment froze, her fork midair, his phone on the table, my voice still hanging in the air. You could hear the clock ticking in the hall. She went pale. Because what she didn't know was that I hadn't just sent it to Dad. I'd sent it to the family group chat. All 6 members. Uncles, cousins, even Grandma, who still thinks Tessa is an angel sent from heaven to fix the family. And they'd all seen it before dinner even started. They'd all seen the truth. They just hadn't had the chance to say anything yet. So while Tessa was clinking glasses and playing the cute little victim card, the silent tsunami was already swelling behind her. And it was going to hit before dessert. There's this strange, silent erosion that happens in families when one sibling starts succeeding while the other never leaves the starting block, but instead of running their own race, they plant themselves like a permanent spectator, arms crossed, bitterness simmering, waiting for the one who dared to move ahead to trip, just once, so they can finally say, "See? You're not better than me." That's what my relationship with Tessa had become, though for the longest time I tried to dress it up in prettier language. I used to tell myself she was just misunderstood, that she hadn't found her footing yet, that our parents had made different choices with her. But that night, watching the thin layer of panic slowly replace the smugness in her expression as she tried to figure out what I'd done, I stopped lying to myself. This wasn't about a broken phone. This had never been about a phone. What she smashed on that kitchen island wasn't glass or hardware or encrypted circuits. It was a symbol of everything I'd worked for, everything she thought I didn't deserve, and everything she secretly resented about the choices I'd made that she never had the discipline to consider. The truth is, that phone represented 10 years of building a life from the ground up without anyone handing me a damn thing. I didn't coast through college on charm or stumble into some vague arts degree hoping the universe would drop a career into my lap. I worked, and I worked hard, double shifts, freelance gigs, night classes, failed startups, endless networking, and more rejection emails than most people could stomach. I built my business with no roadmap, no family backing, and certainly no applause from home. And when things finally started to fall into place, when the money came, when the clients came, when the reputation followed, Tessa started getting nervous, though she'd never admit it. She smiled. Through gritted teeth at my promotions, posted half-hearted congratulations under my business launches, and rolled her eyes every time I mentioned a new project. She liked to call it your little tech thing, like I was still babysitting laptops in my bedroom instead of consulting high-level clients on cybersecurity protocols they barely understood. And that phone, that sleek, titanium device I was so proud of, became a target not because it was expensive, but because it was rare, specific, irreplaceable, and mine. I had saved for it not because I couldn't afford it, but because I respected what it symbolized, a piece of security in a world that rarely gave me any. That was the real difference between us. I built things because I needed them. Tessa destroyed things because she could. Growing up, I was always the responsible one. The one who packed her own lunch, who cleaned the kitchen before Mom asked, who knew when the bills were due and how to fix the printer. Tessa, by contrast, was the beautiful chaos everyone forgave. She wrecked her first car by ignoring the oil light for 6 months, then cried her way out of blame. She dropped out of college halfway through her second year after blowing her financial aid on a wellness retreat in Arizona and still somehow came home to a family who pretended it was just a phase. And every time she made a mess, someone swooped in, Mom, Dad, even our poor Aunt Lisa, and cleaned it up behind her while she threw up her hands and said, "Well, it's not my fault." Somehow, no matter how big the disaster, she always landed in a soft place. But I knew better. I'd spent enough sleepless nights picking up the slack for her to know that she didn't trip into failure by accident. She lived there, comfortably, because failure didn't scare her. Responsibility did. And watching me shoulder mine so visibly, so persistently, drove her insane. So when she picked up that phone and crushed it, she wasn't destroying a piece of tech. She was making a statement. She was saying, I can take what matters to you, because deep down, I don't believe you earned it. But what she underestimated, and what she's always underestimated, is that I don't fight loud. I fight smart. And I'd been collecting the quiet little moments, the comments, the microaggressions, the sideways glances, and deliberate digs for years. That video, which she thought would never exist, was just the final thread in a long tapestry of proof I'd never shown anyone. She didn't know that I'd once found her Googling my business name on Mom's iPad, clearly trying to dig up dirt or maybe proof I wasn't as successful as everyone thought. She didn't know that 2 years ago, I overheard her on the phone with a mutual cousin, mocking my TED Talk voice and calling it a weird corporate cult performance. She didn't know that during my last visit, while I was in the guest room, she went through my suitcase and took photos of my planner, then laughed with her boyfriend about how type A I was, like being organized was a character flaw. I never said anything. I never reacted. I watched, I noted, I moved on because I thought maybe she'd grow out of it. I thought the jealousy would fade, the tension would dissolve with age. But some people don't evolve. They calcify. And now here we were, in our parents' dining room, Tessa sipping her wine like she hadn't just torched the one physical object I'd refused to take my eyes off all day, while my dad sat at the head of the table staring at his phone with that slow, dawning expression that told me he was finally seeing her without the illusion. The room was stiff with silence. My mother filled it the only way she knew how, rambling about overcooked green beans and forgetting the dinner rolls, desperate to keep the peace, pretending she didn't see the tension slicing the air like a blade. Tessa tried to play it cool, acting confused, looking at me with exaggerated innocence, then back at Dad with a wrinkle in her brow. She was searching the faces around the table, trying to read who knew what, who had seen what, trying to calculate how bad this would be. And all the while, I sat still, barely eating, waiting for the ripple to become a wave. She'd always relied on the chaos to protect her, the way she could turn an accusation into a distraction, how she could twist any moment into a misunderstanding, a misquote, a mood swing. But not this time. This time, the evidence wasn't a feeling or a suspicion or a passive-aggressive comment. It was a video. It was irrefutable. And worst of all, it was already in the hands of the people she'd been lying to for years. That's the moment she knew she wasn't holding the cards anymore. And she had no idea how many more I still had in my hand. There's a strange kind of calm that comes over you when the anger burns through everything and leaves something quieter behind, not peace exactly, but precision. A crystal-clear sense of purpose that cuts through the noise and forces you to stop reacting and start calculating. I felt that calm settle in the moment my sister's face twitched with the first real signs of doubt. Not fear yet, but confusion, a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes that told me the balance of control, the dynamic she'd relied on for years, had finally shifted. She didn't understand yet how thoroughly I'd cornered her, but she was beginning to sense that the game she thought she was winning had turned on her, and the worst part for her wasn't even the evidence itself. It was the realization that I had been watching this whole time, quietly, carefully, and that I knew exactly who she was beneath all the performance. The thing about Tessa is, she's always known how to lie, and not just with words. She lied with her face, with her tone, with her timing. She'd weaponize emotion like a professional, adjusting her volume and vocabulary to fit whatever story she was spinning, and people would believe her, not because she was convincing, but because they wanted to believe her. That was the real trick. She never manipulated people into thinking she was good. She just gave them enough plausible deniability to look away from the truth. And growing up, that made her dangerous in ways no one really wanted to talk about, because to call it out would be to admit that the sweet, pretty youngest daughter, the one who always cried at movies and brought home stray animals and made those big sad eyes when accused, was actually a cold, manipulative strategist with a decades-long habit of dodging consequences. I had tried to give her grace over the years, more than once, more than she ever deserved. I had cleaned up after her, defended her, even paid off one of her credit cards behind our parents' backs when she was in what she dramatically referred to as a financial spiral. That particular spiral had more to do with a failed attempt to become a lifestyle influencer in Los Angeles, which lasted about 5 months. 3 of which she spent couch hopping and racking up Uber charges while pretending to her Instagram followers that she lived in a downtown loft with killer light and vibes. She posted filtered photos of food she never cooked and outfits she never owned, all while messaging me privately for money and supportive sister energy, which was her way of guilt-tripping me into solving problems she'd manufactured out of boredom and ego. And through it all, I had told myself that maybe I was being harsh, that maybe Tessa was just struggling to find her place in the world, that perhaps she just needed more time or therapy or encouragement. I had tried to believe that her pettiness and casual sabotage were just temporary symptoms of insecurity. But then she smashed that phone, not by accident, not in a moment of carelessness, but deliberately, gleefully, with the full weight of her resentment, and I realized that this wasn't immaturity or confusion or pain. This was malice. And malice deserved a very different kind of response. That night, after dinner, while she floated from room to room pretending nothing was wrong, making fake charming conversation with relatives, laughing too loudly at her boyfriend's jokes, and slipping little jabs in my direction just quiet enough to be deniable, I sat with my backup phone in the guest room, headphones in, scanning the cloud archive connected to the camera system I'd installed in my condo. I wasn't looking for revenge. Not yet. I was looking for patterns. You see, what Tessa didn't know is that she hadn't just lost control of this particular moment. She'd triggered a retrospective audit of everything she'd touched, borrowed, visited, or ruined in the past year. I pulled up receipts, emails, shared calendar entries, flight logs, and digital timestamps. I dug through every suspicious gap in my personal files, looking for digital fingerprints she might have left behind, and the more I looked, the more I found. 2 months ago, she'd stayed at my place while I was away on business. She said she needed a break from California and that her mental health was in crisis, so I left her the key, stocked the fridge, even paid for a massage appointment at the spa across the street. When I came back, nothing seemed wrong, except that one of my USB drives was missing, and my personal journal app had a login attempt from a device that wasn't mine. I assumed I'd been careless, maybe forgotten to log out. But now, rewatching the kitchen footage from that week, I saw her open drawers she never had a reason to open, rifle through my files like she was on some scavenger hunt, and even take pictures of my home office with her phone. She never asked me about anything. She just snooped, took what she wanted, and left. I found text messages she'd sent to one of our cousins, messages where she speculated about whether I was hiding money overseas, hinted I might be involved in shady tech stuff, and even floated the idea that I was probably screwing someone at a company for contracts. She framed it like gossip, like she was joking, but she was planting seeds. Undermining me. Preparing the soil so if I ever really succeeded, she could claim I'd done it dishonestly. The worst part wasn't that she distrusted me. It was that she wanted me to fall. She wanted to be the one who pulled the thread and watched everything unravel. The broken phone was just the first act in a much longer sabotage campaign I now realized had been running for years. So I gathered it all. I built a folder, neatly organized by date, subject, and digital trail. I didn't blast it across social media or email it to the whole family. I wasn't interested in spectacle. I was interested in precision. I shared it with one person, my father. I attached a simple message. This isn't just about the phone. You deserve to know the rest. And then I waited. Because once the lie starts to crumble, the liar will do one of two things: either they double down and implode in public, or they finally realize the spotlight is no longer theirs to control. And from the look in Tessa's eyes at dinner, I had a pretty good guess which one she'd choose. But I wasn't going to interrupt the process. No, I was going to let her walk right into it. Because the family group chat wasn't silent anymore. The replies had started coming in. And the truth? It was spreading faster than she could keep up. If there is one thing I've learned about family, especially ours, it's that the silences between people often hold more weight than the loudest arguments, that the truths we bury for the sake of holiday meals and polite conversations eventually ferment into something corrosive, and all it takes is one match, one message, one undeniable piece of evidence to blow the whole delicate illusion sky high. That explosion happened before dinner the next night, long before the roast was ready and before the wine could do its usual work of softening the awkward edges of our conversations, and while it wasn't loud in the traditional sense, it thundered in every pause. Every glance and every stammered excuse that came after the notification started lighting up the family group chat like sparks on dry grass. The message I sent was deliberate, short, direct, and devoid of theatrics. I didn't lace it with accusations, didn't include paragraphs of self-defense or emotion. I simply uploaded the video of Tessa flipping and slamming my phone on the kitchen counter, followed by 3 screenshots. One of the phone's intact status minutes before, one of her smirking down at it afterward, and one, most importantly, of the exact moment she caught me watching her and didn't flinch, because she was so sure I wouldn't do anything about it. I added one sentence, no more, for anyone who's still convinced this was an accident. I hit send while brushing my hair in the guest room, listening to the murmur of voices downstairs, knowing full well how quickly word would spread through our extended web of relatives, uncles and aunts who'd always said Tessa was just passionate, cousins who laughed at her reckless stories because they never had to clean up the consequences, and grandma, who still insisted she was just a free spirit and couldn't be expected to live like everyone else. I didn't send it for revenge in the traditional sense. I sent it because I was done holding the weight of silence on my own. I sent it so no one could pretend anymore. And once it was out there, I walked downstairs like nothing had happened and took my seat at the table, perfectly aware that the air was already beginning to shift. It started slowly. Dad's phone buzzed, and he looked down with that careful, measured stillness of a man who knows he can't react yet, but also can't unsee what's just landed in front of him. Then came the buzz from my cousin Michael, who looked up from his screen across the room, eyebrows raised just slightly before he turned to whisper something to his wife. Aunt Lydia, always the one to chime in with well-meaning platitudes, suddenly went quiet, her fork hovering above her salad like she forgot she was holding it. Tessa hadn't checked her phone yet. She was too busy talking, too wrapped up in whatever shallow anecdote she was performing for the boyfriend, probably something about her recent business ideas or a yoga retreat that had changed her life again. But the room was already bending around her, the shift in energy impossible to miss for anyone not trying desperately to ignore it. Then came the moment she finally noticed the pause in her sentence, the furrow in her brow, the way her hand drifted toward her phone out of habit. I watched her eyes scan the screen, watched her lips part as the footage began to play, and watched her jaw tighten as realization bled into her expression like a slow, creeping bruise. She blinked, quickly swiped away the video as if that would make it disappear, then scrolled through the thread, no doubt seeing the reactions. The shocked emoji from Uncle Dean, who, despite being in his 60s and technologically challenged, never misses a family message, the question marks from Lisa, and most damning of all, the quiet, wow. I never would have believed it if I didn't see it, from Grandma. Tessa's face drained of color not because of what I had done, but because her version of the story, whatever version she had already started planting in hushed conversations and subtle hints, was now dead in the water. She looked up at me across the table, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, she didn't smirk, didn't roll her eyes, didn't deflect. She just stared, a long, cold stare full of confusion, disbelief, and something bordering on betrayal, as if I was the one who'd crossed the line. And maybe in her head I had. Because for people like Tessa, there's no greater betrayal than exposing the truth they've spent their entire lives carefully distorting. My mother, ever the peacemaker, tried to salvage the moment with forced normalcy. Why don't we all put our phones away and just eat? It's been a long day. But it was too late. The damage wasn't just digital. It was in the way people were now looking at Tessa, not with admiration or amused indulgence, but with suspicion, with doubt, with dawning clarity. Years of stories, years of patterns, years of excuses had just been retroactively reframed, and you could see it happening in real time as the family recalculated everything they thought they knew about her. Dinner continued, technically. Plates were passed, drinks poured, but conversation lagged, heavy and halting. Tessa barely spoke. Her boyfriend, clearly out of his depth and probably regretting ever coming on this trip, tried to make a joke about politics, which landed with all the grace of a lead balloon. Dad said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence was louder than any outburst could have been. He just kept glancing across the table, occasionally toward me, with that same tight-lipped expression I'd seen the night before. He wasn't angry. He was processing, recalibrating, maybe even regretting how long he'd been blind to the full extent of what had been happening between his daughters. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't provoke. I just ate my food, drank my wine, and let the discomfort settle, not out of spite, but because I knew that sometimes the truth has to sting to be believed. I'd spent years giving Tessa the benefit of the doubt, years assuming the best even when she gave me every reason not to. And for what? So she could tear down what I built out of spite and insecurity? No, that era was over. After dessert, as people started drifting toward the living room or out onto the patio, I slipped away to my room and opened my laptop. I had one final card to play, one last truth to release, not to hurt her, but to protect myself from the inevitable spin I knew she was already drafting in her head. Because Tessa wasn't going to go down quietly. That much I knew. And while the family chat had shaken her, it hadn't silenced her. Not yet. She'd either try to reframe what happened as a joke gone wrong or twist it into some emotionally manipulative sob story. She'd lean into her favorite persona, that misunderstood younger sister who just wanted to be loved and was constantly misinterpreted by her rigid, overly serious older sibling. But this time, I was ready. And the next thing I sent was going to burn through the last of her defenses. Because it wasn't just about exposing her anymore. It was about making sure she never got the chance to do it again. There's a kind of reckoning that doesn't arrive with shouting or slamming doors or theatrical breakdowns, but instead settles over a person like slow, cold rain, silent, steady, and inescapably real, and that's exactly how it happened for Tessa. It wasn't an explosion, it wasn't chaos, and it wasn't the dramatic confrontation she might have been subconsciously prepared for, the kind where she could scream or cry or run out and slam a car door in the driveway while someone chased after her, begging for forgiveness. No, what I delivered that night was quieter, sharper, and far more final. Because when you grow up watching someone manipulate every situation to their advantage, when you watch them twist people's perceptions with crocodile tears and carefully timed breakdowns, and when you've lived under the weight of being the strong one, who always took the high road while they set fire to the bridges behind them, you eventually learn that the only way to break their pattern is not to meet their chaos with chaos, but with cold, calculated, undeniable truth. After the dinner disaster, once the house had emptied out a bit and people started finding excuses to leave early or retreat into corners of the house where the tension didn't press so hard against the walls, I opened my laptop in the quiet of my childhood bedroom, a place that still smelled faintly of old carpet and dried lavender and the past I thought I'd outgrown. I knew she would come looking for me, eventually, whether to demand answers, to beg for mercy, or to deliver some wounded monologue that painted her as the real victim here, but I also knew I needed to act before she did. Because Tessa, for all her recklessness, understood timing, and if I gave her even a few hours to spin her version of events, to text relatives individually and drip-feed a curated narrative about how I had attacked her or humiliated her publicly, then I'd spend the next 6 months cleaning up a mess she'd designed to protect herself. So I recorded a video, simple, direct, nothing theatrical. Just me, sitting at the desk with the camera on, speaking calmly into the lens. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I simply laid it all out. I explained the events, showed the timeline, the messages, the surveillance footage, the text she sent about me behind my back, the way she'd broken into my files, the pattern of behavior stretching back years. I spoke not just as a woman whose property had been destroyed, but as a sister who had carried the weight of someone else's mistakes for far too long. I ended the recording with a sentence I hadn't planned, one that came out instinctively. This isn't about revenge. This is about not being gaslit anymore. Then I sent the video, not to everyone this time, not to the entire family chat, but only to the few people who mattered, the ones whose opinions she always chased, whose approval she measured herself by like it was a currency. I sent it to Grandma, the emotional anchor of our family, who had always believed Tessa could do no wrong. I sent it to Aunt Lydia, the soft-hearted one who tended to pick sides based on who cried harder. I sent it to our cousin Janine, who had always quietly suspected things but never had proof. And finally, I sent it to Mom, who, for all her efforts to keep the peace, had often done so by ignoring my pain entirely. I finished sending the video, closed the laptop, and waited. I didn't have to wait long. The knock on my door was so soft it barely qualified as a knock at all, more like the hesitant tapping of someone not sure if they even had the right to be standing there. I didn't answer. I let her knock again, a little louder this time, before I opened the door and looked at her, not with anger, not with glee, but with a kind of quiet finality that made her shift uncomfortably in place. Her eyes were red, her mascara slightly smudged, but the tears hadn't fallen yet. She looked like someone who had finally seen themselves through someone else's eyes and didn't know what to do with the reflection. She started, her voice shaking slightly, and then she stopped, because whatever speech she had prepared clearly evaporated the moment she saw my face. I stepped aside and let her in, not because I wanted to hear what she had to say, but because I needed to see if she could say anything at all without turning it into a performance. She sat on the edge of the bed like we were back in high school, and she was about to confess something small, like a broken vase or a skipped curfew. But this wasn't small. It had never been small. And she knew it. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered, and I watched her mouth twist around the words, trying to decide if they sounded sincere enough. "I just got so tired of feeling like you always win." That was it. Not an apology. Not ownership. Just another layer of resentment dressed up as vulnerability. I didn't say anything at first. I just let the silence stretch between us until she filled it. "I thought maybe if I knocked you down a peg, people would stop treating you like you're so perfect." Still, not a real apology. Just justification. But something cracked in her voice at the end, a small shift that suggested for the first time in a long time, she might be hearing herself honestly. And then, finally, she asked, barely audible, "Did you send it to Grandma?" I nodded. Her shoulders slumped. The tears came then, but they weren't loud or dramatic. They were quiet, shuddering, and somehow more real than anything I'd seen from her in years. And for a second, I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. Tired of being the one who always had to be the adult. Tired of trying to protect the version of family everyone else insisted we pretend existed. Tired of pretending I was okay with the way she'd carved herself into every space I'd built for myself. She stood slowly, like someone coming out of a trance, and without asking for forgiveness, without pleading for me to take it all back, she said, "I don't think I can fix this." And I replied, "That's the first honest thing you've said all week." She walked out of the room then, not looking back, and I didn't follow. Because some endings don't come with closure or hugs or reconciliations wrapped in sentimentality. Some endings arrive like winter, cold, inevitable, and completely silent. The next day, she left the house early without saying goodbye. Her boyfriend wasn't with her. No one saw her off. And I didn't ask where she was going. In the days that followed, the family group chat went quiet. Not dead, but hushed, like everyone was still trying to digest what they'd seen and figure out what it meant for the stories they'd told themselves about who we were. Grandma called me. She didn't cry, but her voice was heavy, and she said, "I wish I'd asked more questions over the years." Aunt Lydia sent a heart emoji, her version of an apology. And Mom didn't say much, just texted, "I'm sorry you had to carry this alone for so long." And as for me, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won. But I felt lighter. Because the truth, no matter how ugly or uncomfortable, had finally been spoken. And sometimes, that's all the closure you ever get. Or need.